2018, I actually worked for Go Metro, and Justin from Go Metro is going to present later on in the program. And while I was working there, we were contracted by the city of Cape Town to collect data on the minibus taxi operations. So we surveyed using a handheld smartphone device, GPS enabled. The surveyors got onto the taxi at a rank, and then they geolocated and time-stamped each passenger boarding and alighting along the way. And we found that there's quite a significant increase in the understanding of the passenger demand if you do the surveys that way compared to just rank surveys. So for this survey, we surveyed over 23,000 trips on 490 of the taxi routes in Cape Town, which is 62% of all routes. So it's quite a good sample size. It's also a very expensive survey to do, but as a first survey, we didn't have a good handle on what sampling needs to be done to be representative of the entire system. For the 2022 survey, fewer routes were surveyed, and a more robust sample design was employed based on the 2017-18 survey observations. So we surveyed close to 9,000 trips on 240 routes, which is 30% of the known active routes, but routes that actually account for quite a significant proportion of the demand. It's important to note that these surveys were undertaken under very different transport and economic backdrops, with rail mode share having dropped from 20% in 2018 to 3% in 2022. And there was little to no change in the traditional bus services and BRT services demand. Their demands were quite flat. But minibus taxis increased from 48% to 69% of public transport patronage. And during that same time, e-hailing services such as Bolt and Uber actually increased quite significantly as well, from little to nothing to 6.9%, which is almost equivalent to what the BRT service is doing. So yeah, this graph shows the change in mode share for the different modes over the last couple of years. So it's got, can't quite see on my slides here what the years are. I think it's 2003, 2013, 2018, and 2022. So you can see minibus taxis, their market share has increased significantly. Rail has gone down significantly. Good news is that rail is bouncing back. And then the other services have remained relatively constant over the time, with the Golden Arrow bus services actually decreasing ever so slightly. It needs to be borne in mind that the 2022 data was just after COVID, so those numbers have probably bounced back to a certain degree since then. So in terms of the data structure that was collected, so I mentioned earlier that the data were collected using smartphone devices, and those smartphones were then each day uploaded all the data to the cloud. And then that data is then processed and stored in there and then extracted further for further analysis after. So in terms of the attributes that were collected, this table here shows the origin rank, the destination rank, the OD route that's on, the number of passengers transported, the number of times the vehicle stopped, the start time of the trip, how long the trip took, in terms of distance, how far that particular trip was because of the GPS tracker, and in which direction the trip was in relation to the ranks and the peak period. And then lastly, the fare paid by the passengers. From this, additional attributes were calculated, including the stop density, passenger turnover, which is passengers per kilometer, the average speed, and then the revenue for that trip, amongst certain other attributes also. We undertook some exploratory data analysis to understand how these trips were functioning. So what we could see from this is that for the forward and reverse direction trips, most of the taxi trips actually transport 15 passengers, which is the capacity of a minibus taxi. So that implies that they don't stop many times, So they generally fill up the vehicle and then drop the passengers off at the other end. And also for the different times of the day, the morning peak, the evening peak, and the inter-peak period, similar behavior throughout the day. And then also a large proportion of the vehicles were only stopping twice, which includes the ranks on either end. So you can see this spike in the front there. So my screen's actually quite unclear, so I can actually read what I wrote here. But never mind. So yeah, lower occupancy trips are more prevalent in the reverse direction relative to the peak commuter flow. Sorry. So which is understandable. So a lot of these services they transport the tidal flow for the commuters and education purposes in the morning, and then in the afternoon it's the opposite direction. So a lot of these vehicles they transport people in one direction. There's no demand for travel back, so they have to return with an empty vehicle, or they can take one or two passengers. For the longer distance routes, that's not quite feasible because the operating costs are quite high. So sometimes they do not return because it's less financially viable to return and have a empty trip than to just wait until there's demand to go back. So in terms of deeper analysis of the data, took some principal component analysis and k-means cluster analysis to understand which of the operating variables describe the variance in the data the most. So from that, we identified that the distance, the number of stops, excuse me, and the passenger turnover was most descriptive in terms of what the differences in the different types of route topologies within the data. And the cluster analysis then, excuse me, got it in my throat. So this identified that the previous study showed that there was 3 distinct groups within the data. And this study actually showed that there's actually 2 would probably be a better description, but for comparative purposes, we stuck with 3. Thanks. Yeah, so 3 clusters topologies selected for comparison with the 2019 study. So there was the trunk services, the feeder services, and then the intermediate routes. So from this data, we further did the analysis within the data to understand the difference in the operation. So you can see from these graphs here that for the trunk, the interfeeder distributed type routes, the distances are short. The trunk ones have the longer distances, and then the intermediate straddles those two. Regardless of the route topology, we found that most of these trips are actually transporting 15 passengers. This doesn't mean necessarily that they filled up with 15 at the first stop. They may have departed with 7 passengers and collected 8 along the way, or vice versa, or something along that continuum of 0 to 15. But it's likely that most vehicles, given that the number of stops is generally quite low, that they waited to fill up and then departed to the destination. So from this data, we found that 42% of the routes are trunk routes, and feeders 35, and the intermediate routes 23. So the intermediate routes they are longer distances than the feeders, but they are more frequent stops than the trunks. So they serve a different purpose, and they're generally along corridors where there's more activity. So how this then geographically we could associate the trips that were surveyed with the routes they were legally doing between those origins and destinations, and then associating the typology that was assigned to that trip and then to that route to the spatial files for those route alignments in terms of the gazetted minibus taxi routes. This shows the distribution of those. So we've got the feeder routes in red, the trunk routes in blue, with the arrows showing the trip ends, and then the pink dots showing the 10 busiest public transport interchanges in the city. And then the intermediate routes, and all of them overlapped with the active routes that weren't surveyed, shown as the dotted black lines. It looks like there's solid black lines in certain locations, but it's just because there are several taxi routes that overlap on that corridor, so it looks like a solid line. And then we get into the financial operations. So we collected the fares and the revenue. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on minibus taxi financials. There's probably a few people in this room that know a lot more about the finances and viability of minibus taxis than I do. It's just going to go on the observations from this data. So on the top left-hand here, we plotted the fares for the various modes that operate in Cape Town on a fare to distance on the y-axis and fare on the distance on the x-axis and fare on the y-axis to show how the fares are structured for the different public transport services. And this is based on a tariff survey that the City of Cape Town does every year. So this is reported fares for different routes averaged by distance. And then these other graphs here are showing the observed fares for the trips that were surveyed. So you can see there's actually quite a close fit for this data compared to the previous tariff survey. So, and then the revenue against distance plotted here for the different typologies. And you can see that for the feeder services, the revenue is lower, obviously, because the fares are less expensive, and the relationship between distance and revenue is there's a steeper slope, so that the rand per kilometer is actually higher, and in the reverse direction it's a little bit different. But in general, there's a great correlation between the onboard surveys and the fares reported by the industry, so there's a good indication. And then looking at the financial operations in terms of profitability, so we couldn't look at net profit for on a per trip basis, because one vehicle can do many different things on a given day. You can do a feeder trip in the morning and then do different types of operations in the middle of the day, or it can not operate in the middle of the day. So you can't look at the financial operations of a given vehicle from this data. This is just looking at the variable cost. So it's only the gross profit considered for each typology. Showing that the high proportion of the empty low occupancy trips in reverse direction and the shorter distance trips, which is therefore there's a there's a high proportion of negative revenue trips in the reverse direction, which makes sense. So a lot of these vehicles actually they spend more money on the trip to get back to the origin again, so they can do a trip where they fill up and then actually can get revenue for that trip. So, and then for the middle distance routes, the profitability seems to be higher, but it needs to be like, we need knowledge of both the costs and the revenues to understand the profitability of these operations. And it's not possible to estimate the operator profitability from this data alone. As you know, as I mentioned earlier, the operator may do different things on a day or peak period. But so I'm not presenting specific findings to understand what the financial feasibility is of the services, but just a general framework that can be applied to do more in-depth research on the minibus taxi operations by means of these onboard surveys to understand what the revenue generation is and but then you also need to do an investigation in terms of the fixed and variable costs. And so some key findings from this is that the minibus taxis in Cape Town transport more passengers than any other mode. Actually, no, I'm not going to, maybe something that I shouldn't mention. But yeah, so, and minibus taxis are highly adaptable and demand responsive. And since the rise of e-hailing and the decline of rail, they have adapted their services. They now do more trunk services in direct competition with rail services and bus services than they do feeder services. Well, this is true for Cape Town. I don't know how true this is for the other areas, but from anecdotal evidence we have on the e-hailing industry is that a lot of the people that were previously using taxis for the short distance trips are now actually in e-hailing vehicles where they club together 4 or 5 passengers to go to the taxi rank and then do the long distance trip on the taxi or on the bus or on the train, because it actually works out less expensive for them. And we've done this analysis on a separate study. I can't show this here, not a part of the scope. But so the taxi industry, essentially, since the rail has collapsed, they've taken over more of a trunk service. And since the e-hailing has come up, they've done less of a feeder type of service, which they would traditionally envisage to do in terms of the public and LTA. So one of the key findings here is that minibus taxi operational data is essential to understand the public transport system and the minibus taxi's role in the public transport system, given that they are the actual backbone of the public transport industry at this time. And that these onboard surveys, while they are quite costly, they're relatively simple to do. And the analysis, no one needs a degree in computer programming to do this analysis. It's actually quite simple. And that the inferences that can be gleaned from this data that can be very insightful. Yeah, so what I didn't want to mention earlier, because I wasn't sure what the percentage was, but one of the things that I observed from this was that the minibus taxis actually account for, the trunk routes alone account for 30% of the daily public transport passengers in Cape Town. And these services are actually better served by larger vehicles, because they pick up 15 passengers at point A and they drop off 15 passengers at point B most of the time. A larger vehicle would be a much more financially viable in terms of operational costs to deliver that service. There are obviously barriers to doing that, in the fact that the larger vehicles are super expensive, and that the taxi recapitalization program doesn't allow for, doesn't cover those larger vehicles, and the fact that the NLTA doesn't actually allow vehicles larger than 35 seaters to transport, to operate using minibus taxi operating licenses. So the government really needs to consider infrastructure provision and policy and subsidy formulation to optimize the minibus taxi system, not try and replace it with something else, but actually to work with the minibus taxi industry into optimize what's already there. And that includes enabling the right sizing of the vehicles for the services, providing the priority infrastructure to increase the service efficiencies, and subsidies that actually allow for the flexibility, because a lot of the minibus taxi operators we've spoken to, we've asked them, why don't they use the larger vehicles to do these trips in the morning and in the afternoons? They're like, what are they going to do with these expensive vehicles for the rest of the day? They don't have depots to park them at. They're not flexible enough to change from a trunk service in the morning to a feeder service during the rest of the day. So these are considerations that need to be taken into account in order to formulate effective policy and subsidy to empower the industry and to create a better public transport system. And that's all I have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dirk. Ladies and gents, I think we can agree that he's got a complex job, and City of Cape Town is a very complex metro, and the work they are doing there, very impressive. I had the privilege in meeting with Dalian Campbell 2 weeks ago in Cape Town, and it's so interesting to listening to her, all the work they are doing and the good work they are doing. So we really appreciate them presenting at the Transport Forum. Let me just get our program up again here. Right, ladies and gents, our next presenter is Mr. Justin Coetzee. He's the founder of Go Metro, and he's going to talk about the case study of bus and minibus electrification, profiling and investigation and work. Let's just see if we can hear Justin. Justin, are you online? Can you hear us?
Hi, Harry. Hopefully you can hear me. Hi, Harry.
I know he's had another
Can you hear me?
appointment before us, so it might be that he still did other appointment, and we'll swap presentations. To just give
Hi,
him
Harry.
a
Can you hear me?
moment or two. Justin, can you
Justin,
unmute
Harry?
yourself and speak? Let's see if we can hear you.
Yeah, we can. Hello, Harry. Can you hear me on the venue? Apparently they can hear me on Zoom.
Okay, let's just do a switch here, just a moment.
So, to all those on Zoom, hope you're doing well. Nice to see some familiar names, and hopefully the venue gets the connection to Zoom. I'm sure it's a venue issue. And Darby, you might have the same issue.
Justin, just checking, can you hear me?
Yes, Harry, can you hear me?
For some reason, we can't
Yes,
hear you.
Harry,
Just trying to
testing.
fix it. Justin, we've got funny glitches here this morning, so just a moment of us.
No problem. Should I just keep talking to test? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Harry? Hello, Harry?
Can hear you, Justin. It's great. Great.
Okay. Can the venue hear me now? Okay. Can the venue hear me? Okay.
I just check. Justin, can you just say something? Let's see.
Testing, can you hear me? 1, 2, 3.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Shall I kick off, Harry?
Justin, you can continue. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Lovely to see everyone. Apologies, I can't be there in person. But yeah, very excited to show you the work that we've been doing in the last few months on using data to understand the potential for electrification of the minibus taxi sector. I think it dovetails nicely with Dirk's presentation. And yeah, it's really a pleasure to show you the work that we've been doing. I think it's really important that we just acknowledge the scale and the size and the prevalence of the minibus taxi sector. And if South Africa is going to be serious about its commitments to the Paris Climate Accord, we need a viable strategy that deals with the decarbonization of this industry and supports the decarbonization of this industry. And that's the work that we've been doing in the last few years to try and figure out how do we electrify the minibus taxi sector. And I'll show you some of the results today. Just a brief introduction. We don't need to tell you about the minibus taxi sector if you are a South African in the transport sector, but just reflect on the number of vehicles, the number of jobs, the number of people that are engaged in this industry. It really is part of the DNA of our cities and contributes significantly to economic development, labor provision, and particularly the production of fuel and emissions. So let's see. Let me show you what we are planning on doing in the next while. So we're busy importing and homologating an electric minibus taxi, seats 13 people, and will be road legal later this year. It is a brand called Higer. Its range will be 200 kilometers. It will take 8 hours to slow charge on an AC charge because it only takes 7.5 kilowatts charge, but it can charge to up to 80% in 50 minutes on a 50 kilowatt DC charge. I think it's really important putting those two numbers out there because what this vehicle cannot accommodate is a 22 kilowatt AC charge. And it's very important to note that, and I'll explain a bit later why. And the 50 kilowatt DC charge is very, very important because that is what makes this vehicle viable to the South African market. And our data will show you there. We'll also show you a bit later today that the operating costs have up to 45% operating savings. That is in terms of fuel, in terms of maintenance, and in terms of parts. Fewer moving parts, less maintenance, and of course, cheaper per mile travel if you are plugging into a network at scale. The vehicle looks like a minibus. It's as wide as a normal minibus today. It can fit in a rank. It can be driven with the same licensing. It is the same height, width, slightly heavier, of course, and it can take the same amount of people. So in terms of changing your operations, there's no change to the operation today. In fact, feedback we've gotten from drivers that have tested this vehicle is that it's maybe a bit easier to drive than your diesel equivalent. The vehicle has a CCS2 plug, which is pretty much becoming the norm, and that allows it to do both AC and DC charging. The interior is pretty robust and rugged. The seats are pretty robust and rugged. And so it's a vehicle that after significant testing in the last few months is looking pretty good. So that's just a few more shots of the vehicle. So box one ticked, there is a vehicle soon to be available for sale. So what do we do? So we looked at two facilities. One is at Bergsicht in Stellenbosch, where there's the potential to build a charging facility. You can see where the stacking lanes at the taxi rank are, where the queuing area is, where the wash bay is, and then there's an open piece of ground right behind next to the bowling club where there's the potential to build a charging facility. We, thanks to UYILO and the National Department of Science and Technology, we used some funding from the UYILO Fire Starting Grant to develop a concept design for a 16 charging bay, 800 square meter charging hub that's currently going through planning permissions and through the municipal processes in order for us to commence construction. But this 16 charging bay hub can support up to 350 vehicles if each one has a charging slot and it runs for 12 hours on a schedule. you can support the entire rank's contents of 350 plus vehicles. At Century City, we're busy developing and designing a in-rank charging facility that takes up a bit smaller space, 10 bays. And this will be commissioned in partnership with Rabi Property and with the Century City Property Owners Association, as well as the 13 associations that make use of this facility to bring people to and take people from Century City and Canal Walk Mall. So, as everyone who knows anything about GoMetro knows, we love data and we love collecting data and we love finding answers in data. And so we've, over the last few years, have been plugging in this little device, an OBD reader, into as many taxis as we can today and collecting longer term data. You'll recall Dirk presented data that was collected in an app. Well, an app only works if there's a passenger in it. The app only works if there's a human in it, with a phone in their hand. So the app has limitations to collect data, because if a passenger gets off or the ride stops, well, you lose track of what that vehicle's doing. Telemetry and the tracking data allows us to follow up a lot more closely. So we plugged this vehicle with the driver's participation, the owner's permission. We plugged this OBD reader into a vehicle for 14 days, collecting 2-week cycle across the end of a month, to figure out what does this vehicle do? Where does it go? Where does it dwell? How often does it return to Century City, as an example? And will it ever theoretically run out of juice? So if it started with a full charge in the morning, it was able to visit Century City, it was able to do its normal day, would it ever not be able to finish its current work because it would run out of charge? That was the kind of critical question. We collected more than 1,000 days of taxi data, both at Century City and at Bergster. So we have pretty much the definitive data set when it comes to taxi operations, and the largest data set of real world operations. It's not undersampled. It isn't a sample of maybe more or less than 100 trips or 4 vehicles. It's a significantly well sampled and well spread out data set that is matching the operations of taxis today. So we wanted to see what the ability to charge would be, what range attributes there were, what trip duration and frequency looked like, and then tallying that back to an estimate on fuel expenditure. Fuel expenditure is, of course, a function of the vehicle you drive, its age, its maintenance history, the power of your foot, how much brake you use. So fuel economy is quite a wide range, but we've used a lot of averages in these figures, conservative averages in these figures. So charging capacity. Key questions are, how long does a vehicle spend at a rank, the total daily time? So it could maybe charge a little bit, then go, and then charge a little bit, then go, and then charge a little bit. That's called opportunity charging. How long does it stay for the maximum consecutive period in a day? That would be the biggest window with which to fill it up, as it were. How many days does it visit a facility like Century City or Bergster? Does it go every day? Does it go once a week? Because it would be a problem if you had to charge at the rank, but you only went there once a week. And then how much opportunity do we have to charge during the day as an expression of kilometers? So for every single vehicle that we've analyzed, we figured out what is the average consecutive dwell time, what the average percentage of days is that it visits that hub, the minimum daily charge, average daily charge, maximum daily charge capacity is expressed in kilometers. That's the amount of time you'd have at the rank as an expression of distance. And every vehicle then has a value, sometimes per day, sometimes for an average for the 14 days, but every single vehicle can have a score with regards to its feasibility. The range attributes are, well, when it leaves the rank, where does it go? What does it do? And we often always stop at how much do you do per day, because we think that there's only going to be one opportunity to charge. So we must fill it up to the 200 kilometers and then off it must go. So if a vehicle does 500 kilometers that day, we're like, oh, no, it's failed. However, it's not true. Did it start full? Did it have a lunchtime slot? Did it have an evening slot that it could charge? So we found in the modeling of real world data, opportunities to charge presented themselves throughout the day. so that a vehicle could exceed the range of the battery of 200 kilometers and support up to 300, 400, 500 kilometers. I think probably 500 you're pushing it. But yeah, getting a sense of what available is. And then looking at where there's insufficient range with rank charging. So if I can't plug in at home, if I can't plug in on a third-party site, if I've only got the rank, when would we run out of power? And so for 74% of the time, there's sufficient range with all operations. And for 26% of the time, there would be insufficient range if there was, if they followed the exact same operations that we observed. And we'll dive into that 26 a little bit later to see just how bad is that 26. So daily minibus taxi operating range, the top line is the maximum distance a vehicle did. The bottom line, the yellow line, is the minimum distance that vehicle did per day. And the blue line is the average between the two. And then the horizontal axis is just the vehicle ID. So here we had 40 vehicles participating in the data collection exercise. And you can see the envelope of where your minimum distance is, your maximum distance, and your average distance. And there you can see the daily range exceeding 200 kilometers for pretty much everybody except for maybe 7 or 8 of the vehicles. So if we had a simplistic view, we'd think that 80% of the vehicles can't work because the vehicle's battery capacity is only 200 kilometers. Not true, and we'll show you why. So just a sample. So it's very, very deep data, very, very refined data. You can get a real sense of that vehicle's operation. There's one vehicle for 14 days in Stellenbosch. There's another vehicle doing something completely different. There's another vehicle doing something completely different. Some long trips, some short trips. He has another vehicle doing something completely different. So every single vehicle has its own fingerprint. Every single vehicle has its own characteristics. Every single vehicle is different. And so it's really important that there's this data-driven approach. We've got significant data, each single vehicle being mapped in this regard, which means that we can show an owner the fuel consumption, we can show the savings potential, and we can start working out total cost of ownership. So this is a very, very powerful data set. I'm just going to skip ahead and get to, okay, but what about those range shortfalls of 26%? So when we look at the average range of a vehicle per day, and we look at the times that vehicle does something different. So maybe that vehicle has a long trip one day, or it's got a kind of special out of town or something that pushes its operating kilometers. Those vehicles' average kilometers for the 14 days pretty much are within the 150 to 300 range. So they're pretty much within striking distance. It's the distance between the average and the peak per vehicle that's interesting. Because if you eliminate that one day that it does something different, something out of range, and maybe a diesel vehicle in that fleet goes and does that particular job, then that would flatten the curve completely. So practically speaking, what's likely to happen when you introduce electric minibuses is they will do what's good for them. They will run lots of kilometers. They will gobble up all those feeder services and those intermediate services. And some of the longer range trips will transfer to a diesel fleet and be handled by a diesel fleet. So just because we observe a range shortfall in the diesel fleet today doesn't mean that the electric vehicles will be asked to do the same job when they are introduced. And flattening that peak will be quite a contributor to making it viable for more. When we dive into the range shortfall, so that 26%, when we look at, well, where was it less than 50 kilometers shortfall? So it was pretty much very, very close. That's 7.7% of the time. Orange is where it kind of goes beyond between 50 and 100. So that's a significant deviation. And only 7.5% of the time is it more than 100 kilometers shortfall. So that's a vehicle really doing something out of range. And so trying to design a system for that 7.5% is going to be impractical, especially if you consider that 7.5% is likely to shift to diesel fleets. And so you can expand the range considerably, or the spectrum considerably. And suddenly 26% becomes 19%, becomes 9%, and you are well within the range of all. When we look at the average minibus trip distance and the number of trips, so you never have a single trip going over 200 kilometers. So if it is fully juiced for that trip and there's a charger on the other side, it could work. It's that return leg, which is where the vehicle gets caught out. getting back to a hub. Which is why the way that this will work is if you have lots and lots of charging stations at lots of ranks, so that on one distance of the trip you can charge, on the other distance back you can charge. And having charging at each end of the legs will make a huge difference to the viability of these vehicles being able to get through the day. The average trip distance is 56 kilometers. So your shuttling is happening. 56 kilometers is well within any range. And then it's a case of it would have to break up, 3 or 4 trips and then charge. The maximum trip distance between visits to Century City, this was also very interesting data. So every single vehicle we looked at, what's the longest time it takes to get back to Century City? Now, remember, the vehicle has 200 kilometers range. So if it goes over 200 kilometers, you ran out of juice before you got back to Century City. And in all of the data sets you'll see here, no vehicle ever did more than 200 kilometers before it got back to Century City. The difference was it got back to Century City and then it went off on another trip immediately, rather than stopping to charge. So if there was enough scheduling and enough of a window, you'd be able to get the behavior to change. Average time between trips, this is also very interesting. So it takes 1 hour to fill up on a 50 kilowatt DC charger. Remember, this vehicle does not support 22 AC. Very important note. Only 50 kilowatt DC or 7.5 AC. So on a 50 kilowatt DC charge, you need 45 minutes to get 80% of your battery charged. So here, your average dwell is between 30 minutes and 1 hour, 30 minutes. So averaging out between an hour between trips is more than enough time to always have the availability for charge. What we found where vehicles, what would happen is they wouldn't hold at Century City, they would go hold somewhere else for some reason. However, they would still hold somewhere. They would dwell somewhere in between trips. So getting them to dwell at the charge points would be feasible. So the impacts, well, if we can get this right, minibus taxi profitability will improve. There'll be new job creation, new industry, local manufacture. Our automotive sector would respond to the risk that EVs present to our trade balance. You also think about the amount of diesel fumes that drivers must be breathing in every day. Not just the passengers, and of course, who are getting into taxis that are idling a lot. But drivers are spending their whole day in these vehicles. It really is important that the impact here could be increased life expectancy by improving the air quality right at the rank and the air quality for the drivers. Of course, there's CO2 emission reductions. The grid is going greener. It is changing its characteristics over time. So, and we're able to now wheel very soon. So we'll be able to buy solar power and not necessarily be on coal. So there's real change happening in the sector, and it's moving really, really quickly. And it's really exciting to see how data can contribute. So yeah, so that's just a quick run through some of the data sets. Always available for questions. I think, yeah, always available for call to take this through. And we now are ready to, as we homologate the vehicle and get it introduced, construct the first hubs. This is really happening. I can share that with the audience, is that this is really taking place. And watch the space. I'm sure it'll come to a taxi rank near you soon. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you so much, Justin. You're receiving a big hand here. Justin, this was exciting, and it's a paradigm shift you guys are busy with, and we've enjoyed the presentation, and we're looking forward and to keep an eye on this important project. So thank you very much. Justin, would you be available for the panel discussion at about 12:30?
Unfortunately not. No, I'll have to excuse myself today.
So let me quickly hear, is there a burning question at the moment for Justin, perhaps? Anybody wants to ask a question? Burning question. There's one. Just a moment.
Good morning. There's a lot of, you've related a lot to distance, how much juice will get you X amount of kilometers. But if a taxi is spending hours in congested traffic, does that not also use battery capacity or electricity?
Very, very small, a great question. but very, very small amounts of power is used in idling because it doesn't idle. If it's not moving, if it's dead still, it's just critical systems. And then it also has the capacity for regenerative braking. So stop, start is also potentially a little bit helpful for the range. So congestion does not really feature in reduction of range at a critical sensitivity.
Thank you, Justin. Is it a burning question? We're running late. Fine, thank you. Justin, thank you very much. We are running a bit late, but thank you very much for this great presentation. People do have your contact details on the Transport Forum web, and we're going to keep a close eye on this project. Thank you very much also for your support to the Transport Forum. So take care then in the UK. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Ladies and gents, what we're going to do now is we're going to take our break now because we're running a bit late. Seems that we've started to winning our technical glitch. And let's take a 15 minutes break. So I'll see you back here, please, at 11:15. Enjoy the break. And there's nice snacks sponsored by University of Johannesburg. So take a 15 minutes break. Ladies and gents, please take up your seats. There will be more opportunities for networking after the event when we have lunch. So please take up your seats that we can continue with our next very important presentation. Right, ladies and gents, we need to start. We're already a bit late on our program, so we really need to start. Jan, if you can give me the agenda. There we go. So ladies and gents, our next presenter is Ms. Rebecca Paula. She's the communications manager for Santaco. And she's going to talk about fleet management and customer service in the taxi industry. Thank you, Rebecca. Good to see you late.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. How are you? Well, thank you. I was quite worried at some point that I was going to stand between you and the comfort break. So I'm happy everybody has had that comfort break. And so we can engage. Interesting, I'm hearing one person is already saying, does customer service exist in the taxi industry? It does. It does. Yes, it does. I'll show you how. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Machikidi Rebecca Pala. I head communication and I'm also the national spokesperson for the South African National Taxi Council. You all know it as SANTACO, and I will be speaking about fleet management and customer service in the sector that I speak for. And what you see there is essentially the transformation or the journey that we've had as an industry in terms of the vehicles that we've been using from when we started to where we are today with your Quantums, as well as Sprinters, amongst others. I titled the next slide, Who or What is SANTACO? Because I've come to learn that a lot of people are still largely confused of who we are, and I'm hoping that after this engagement, it will be clarified. Some people have called us an association, which ironically is the lowest structure within the work that we do. Perhaps to just explain briefly, SANTACO, which I've already explained, is the South African National Taxi Council, is an apex body that has been recognized by the democratic government since 2001. But you would all know that the work that we do, or the taxi industry, has been there even before the democratic government came into power. In terms of our composition, we are represented in all the 9 provinces of the country. We also have the women's desk. We've got meter taxis. We've got cross-border as well as scholar transportation. All of those people are represented within the council. And the leadership that we have is elected democratically. And these people then go to a conference where they elect leadership. So we've got democratic processes also within the taxi industry. And we employ well over 300,000 South Africans who work as administrative staff like myself. You also have at the people that most commuters will engage with mostly, which are your drivers, marshals, as well as rank managers. And we ferry just over 16 million South Africans. This is in accordance with data by Statistics South Africa, but also some of the data that we collect ourselves on the ground on a daily basis. Now, fleet management. The taxi industry, a lot of you would know, and something that's quite gravely concerning for us is that a lot of people, one, are very fascinated by the industry, and so they do a lot of research, and they also want to bring about a lot of innovation, but oftentimes they do that without necessarily involving us and only want to come when they want buy-in. That's very concerning. And I'm hoping that we can change that, because I know we also have people in business in this particular engagement today. So the status quo, which is changing in relation to fleet management for a start, is that we want to get to a point where we ensure that we've got an operation that's cost effective, that we are able to have continued vehicle maintenance, that our drivers as well as our assets are managed properly, that we've got safety of vehicles and that there's compliance as well, that our operations are efficient. And this, by the way, is the primary responsibility of the industry. Hence, you hear the body that represents the industry speaking of it. So we're not just saying government must bring subsidy or that they must help us professionalize ourselves. We also understand that inherently it is our responsibility, and hence we're doing some of the work that I'll speak about as I proceed with this presentation. Currently, we've got taxi associations. Perhaps let me break down the structure also for everyone to understand. So the industry starts with an individual operator. That's a person who gets authorized by government through provincial regulatory entities, which we call PRIs. These people are the ones in government who authorize for an individual to have a valid operating license so that they can purchase a vehicle that they will then have ferrying South Africans from point A to point B. These individuals then converge to form what we call an association. At that association, they then have a leadership, which is an executive. And then from that, you then have this convergence again of associations forming a regional executive committee, which will then have a chairperson who's deputized, and then there'll be a secretary who's also deputized. You have a treasurer, a public relations officer, and many other extensions, which are also inclusive of things such as ensuring that you register grievances, and there's also disciplinary processes. That very process then goes on to the provincial level, where you have regions then converging to form provincial executive committees. And then from the province, then you have those converging to form the National Executive Committee, which will be comprised of representatives from the 9 provinces, from cross-border, scholar transport, meter taxi, as well as the women's desk. And that at the national level, you also have people we call national office bearers. Those are people like the president, his deputy, who then report daily to the national office and ensure that the well-being of the industry is taken care of. And then the highest structure, which you can equate to a parliament, but for the taxi industry, then becomes the management council. So when you say Santaco is an association, you're literally reducing us to one part, which is at the very low level. And I hope that it makes sense why we're rather called a council as opposed to an association. So the taxi associations then carry the biggest workload of running everyday taxi operations. This include obviously fleet management and customer service, which are largely implemented at that level. Some of these methods are working towards the development as well as the sustenance of the well-being of individual operators, the vehicles. We also have at associations a database of who owns what vehicle, how many vehicles, where do they operate, what are the fares that are being collected there, and things of that sort. So our taxi associations are literally the heart of the work that we do. So the status quo of fleet management in the industry is changing. And so when I speak about it, it will not necessarily be that that's something that is already is still happening. It happens in facets, but other associations are moving forward, and we're hoping that over time we'll get to a point where we're all somewhat seamless in terms of the work that we do. So the work of data capturing, I've already spoken about, happens at the level of an association. And you also have got scheduling, which largely happens at an association, but also at a taxi rank where you'll see a gentleman, most of them will use a notepad and they know which taxi loads after which one. So that's essentially scheduling that they do. And as I proceed with the presentation, you'll see how we're now automating that with the use of modern day technology. So this is just to give you a picture of where we are and where we're moving towards. And then the administrative stuff, I've already spoken about how they essentially keep records of who is our member, what vehicle are they using. They also look at issues of licensing of vehicles, issues of licensing of the very permits that are used for one to be able to be eligible to operate. So they also offer support in terms of ensuring that licensing is renewed, amongst other matters. In terms of customer service, we understand it to translate to consistently meeting customers' expectations timelessly and really embodying a demeanor of empathy and the people-first conduct, which a lot of people would then call professionalism. In the taxi industry, the idea of customer service would really ensure the sense and comfort, as well as the free will of the commuters that we have. And I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking of the many videos that you usually see on TikTok of people really saying they haven't been treated well. We are fully aware of that. As I proceed with the engagement, you'll see how the council in particular is making sure that we're doing away with these. But it's important to underscore that it's not every taxi operator or every taxi marshal that ill-treats customers. And we want that narrative to be understood. Because using this holistic approach, I know I'm speaking to academics, you don't like blanket approaches, you want things to be quantified. We want that to be understood to say, it's not every operator that ill-treats commuters. In fact, a lot of people have good stories to tell, especially for those of us from underprivileged backgrounds. You've had an instance where you were short of R1 and a driver allowed you to get into their car and essentially could go to where you had to go. So it is very important to underscore that customer service is in existence, and we're working towards ensuring that we cut out the negativity and that the positive should rather outweigh that. Now, we have rank managers. These are people who oversee the well-being of the ranking facilities that we use on a daily basis to commute to different areas. And then you also have marshals. Those are the people who will tell you which taxi to go to. And then you also have taxi drivers. I'm not going to dwell too much on these because a lot of people already understand the status, but it's important to also understand and appreciate that at the level of the associations, I spoke earlier when I spoke about the structure, that we've got people who handle grievance matters as well as really ensuring that there's disciplinary processes, so they act as the arbiter. especially internally in terms of ensuring that consequence management is achieved in that particular regard. So we've got disciplinary processes that are still done largely with when a member has sort of erred in behavior, they'll be called in, and the people that are unhappy will be given a sense of one anonymity, but you also then have all of your matters being addressed. And it's important also because we've got members of the public watching this. People must always trust in the offices of associations. Go there and tell them what happened so that we are able to be assisted in terms of ways of knowing how to correct ourselves, as opposed to immediately running to rather just, use generic terms about the kind of treatment that you get from the industry. But it's also important to again speak about the important role of law enforcement. A lot of people will often say, I was, violated by a person who purports to be from the industry. And the question is, but why aren't we trusting in law enforcement and empowering them so that we don't have would-be criminals seeing a loophole and really capitalizing on that, because people have sort of demonstrated and or perceived the industry to somewhat be against the law. We are not. In fact, we are one of the people that fully work very closely with law enforcement in terms of ensuring that there is legality and things of that sort. What we really are doing to speed up the process in terms of ensuring that there's ideal customer service and fleet management in our industry is training. A lot of people would know that our industry has largely just employed people who have driver licenses and maybe a public driving permit. But the understanding we have is that if you're carrying human cargo and you're engaging with different people on a daily basis, you're going to have to get a lot more training than just being able to move a car from one point to the next point. That's where we then have a collaboration with the Transport Education Training Authority, that's TETA. And TETA, you would know, is an arm of government. And what they do is they help the taxi industry, one, to identify the skills that are needed, but also to help us in terms of ensuring that the training takes place. We also have some independent institutions which are accredited, and they also offer training to the industry, most of which looks at issues such as first aid. They also look at issues such as customer service. It's also important to mention that Santaco also has a transport academy. It's based in Valcom. So that goes to show that we understand we have a responsibility, as opposed to waiting to be helped, that we also do something in our own accord to see to it that we improve the state of affairs within our industry. We have a flagship program. It's called Tlokomela. Tlokomela is a Sotho word which essentially means be careful. So what we do is we complement the work that's done by law enforcement, especially when it comes to peak traveling periods like the Easter long weekend that we just came back from. This program essentially is Santaco taking some of our members to say that they need to uphold customer service, but also preach the message of road safety. And this, I hope you can help me with a round of applause. After a very long time, from this very long Easter weekend that we came from, we did not record any major accidents that were contributed to by the taxi industry. And I think that's a good story to tell. I've spoken about the collaborations that we've got with the public and the private sector in terms of ensuring the well-being of our industry. I'm going to talk about one particular partnership we have, because we've got quite a number of them, which particularly addresses the two issues of fleet management as well as customer service. A company called Shared Mobility Africa has been working with the industry for quite a while now. And what they're doing is ensure that we've got tracking devices, that we've got convenient booking systems, that we've got a fintech solution towards the industry, that we've got rental services, and then to a certain extent, even e-hailing solutions. And now to basically unpack some of the initiatives that they've brought to the industry, which have been trialed. And we've got evidence that it shows, one, that there is an appetite in the industry, contrary to popular belief. We have an appetite to change and embrace modern day technology, but also that we are open to collaborate with the private sector, provided that you come to us and you speak to us, as opposed to coming with an off-shelf product that sometimes doesn't necessarily understand the distinctions of the industry, thereby essentially, reducing the chances of collaboration. We've got what we call TAMS, in short, it's the Taxi Association Management System. This system is by the company I've just cited, and what it usually does really is to ensure that there is an easy-to-use online system that is administered by taxi industry associations, in particular the administrative staff. So that already tells you these people would have already been trained, right? Because I spoke about that skills gap that we already have. So these people have been trained, and what they do is they manage and update data, and they don't do it that on a hard book, which can get dumped with water or get burned or whatever the case may be. So there is movement. The system also ensures that there's compliance, and that would also facilitate, I spoke earlier on about the importance of updating of documentation as opposed to waiting until you're stopped by a traffic officer only to find that your license has been, the time has passed. And then one other important one is that this company also provides the taxi industry with a tracking vehicle tracking system. And this operates like with every other on a 24 hours basis. And it essentially embraces the use of telematic hardware, which is installed in the vehicles, but you know how the technology of vehicle tracking works also. And this essentially gives the individual taxi associations, as well as the operators who are the owners of vehicle, real-time GPS satellite network results. So you're able to know where the car is, what route it's driving at, and should it be that for whatever reason it moves from the route that it's allocated at, which by the way is one of the biggest problems that lead to violence in our industry. This then means that an operator and the association is able to say to the driver, what are you doing there? Move back to where you're allocated, as opposed to them just driving there and essentially causing a discomfort with everybody else. So that is quite important. But also the technology that it has, which again is very common in terms of the space, is a technology that allows the owner of the vehicle to stop it at any time if they feel that it's not safe or that something that shouldn't be done is being done with the vehicle. So that's essentially what we're doing there, which then means that we're able to know where our vehicles are, what time they're moving, if they're moving in the pace that they're supposed to, and that the driver is doing as is expected of them. That also allows the associations who are keeping track of the fleet to be able to know if we need more vehicles based off of the two systems that I've already spoken about. And then recently, we've been speaking in the media quite a lot about an automated seat booking system. We call it Book a Seat. The system for now is targeted at long distance traveling, because you'd remember during COVID-19, the hard lockdown, when we were all very apprehensive to gather in large numbers for a long time. That's when we started seeing that there's a loophole in that for long distance traveling, especially during the peak periods, people wait for too long in our ranking facilities. Now, when you use the technology of Book a Seat, you are able to book a seat prior to going to the ranking facility. When you get there, your seat has been secured, you get into the car and the car leaves. We're hoping to, over time, integrate it into short distances, but for now, we're starting off with long distance trips. One of the other partnerships that we have is with a company that's Black woman owned, and it's called SmartVein. What they're doing is ensuring that we've got safe recruitment and compliance processes. So this means they also use technology in the form of telematics to help us with the recruitment, to say, as opposed to just hiring a person because they've got a competency to drive, you also are able to have the system, which, by the way, is backed up with systems from the Home Affairs. They are able to determine if one has a criminal record, if they are liable to be employed, and things of that. So that's one of the ways in which we want to make sure that the people we send into our vehicles to ferry South Africans from point A, point B, are people who are safe, but people also who understand the role that they have to play in terms of ensuring that people are sent to their workplaces safely. The system is called Street Governor. It does a whole lot of other things. It helps us with HR management from the perspective of our associations, risk profiling from the perspective especially of owners, payroll management. You would know a lot of people have said, especially again during the COVID-19, when our drivers, most of them could not qualify for UIF, for instance, because they're not formally registered. They're helping us bridge that particular gap. So you can already see that the COVID-19 pandemic was a huge wake-up call for the taxi industry, and we're doing quite a lot to ensure that we never find ourselves where we were at that particular time. I did not intend to take too much time, ladies and gentlemen, but before I leave the stage, I just want to let you know that Santaco has an inaugural policy conference. For the very first time since we were formally formed in 2001, we'll have a gathering which will have taxi industry leadership, government, civil society, community leadership, and I hope some of yourselves, especially those that are in academia, but as well as those in business, What we want to do is to have this convergence where we can essentially have a festival of ideas as opposed to working parallel. For instance, the important works of academia that have been reported here are things that give us a lot of insight as an industry, and we want you to come a lot closer than you are already. So that's happening in the tropical province, which I happen to come from, of Limpopo, and it will be between the 13th and the 16th of May. You're all invited. Please just pull me to the side to get further details about how you can collaborate, even in terms of giving ideas of what you would think the industry should look into as we work towards bettering ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, the taxi industry is open to business, it's open to collaboration, it's open to ideas, and we want to work with every South African that's concerned about the well-being and the commuting of over 60% of South Africans who use our services on a daily basis. Edith Widder says, exploration is the engine that drives innovation. Innovation drives economic growth. So let's go and explore. Thank you so much.
And this great, ladies and gents, thank you very much to Santaku for presenting at the forum, and clearly a very innovative organization, bringing in proper governance into the industry. And we're looking forward to that innovation that you say of ideas. And we really would like to support you in that. I'm sure that you're going to stay for the panel discussion, and people will like to engage with you during the panel discussion. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gents, just to have a look at our program again. So our next presenter then is Mr. Dawie Bosch. He's a consultant for C40 Cities. And he's going to talk about the business case for moving at a scale to electric buses in South Africa and on the insights into the South African bus industry. So Dawie is going to present from Cape Town. Dawie, thank you very much for sharing the day and your ideas with us. We really appreciate that. We'll just need to do the switch over here in the venue, and it will be with you. So Dawie, let's see, can we hear you? Can you talk a little bit?
Yes, sorry. Should I be presenting from my side, Harry?
That will be appreciated, Dawie. We can hear you clearly. If you can share your screen.
Okay, very well. I'll share my screen just a moment. There we are. Where is that now? Thank you very much. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Dawie.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the opportunity, and hi to everybody in the venue and online. Yes, we're focusing in this study on where is there a business case, or what is the requirements for a business case to move at scale to electric buses in South Africa. So the report that was recently finished, January 2024, 4C40 is displayed on the left-hand side. And I'm sure, Harry, you guys will upload it to the Transport forum site. And alternatively, you can use it through the link that is on this presentation that will also be shared. We'll go through the key elements of the business case for electric buses. Then a note on modal share. We're looking at the recommendations that came out from this report. And the last item on insights into the South African bus industry. Now, the study context is the study basically started from C40 side. It is a global network of about 100 of the cities with strong action plans to address climate change or the climate crisis. In South Africa, the 5 cities that are members of C40 are shown here. It is basically Joburg, Tshwane, eGololeni, eThekwini, and Cape Town. So the study focused on specifically what would be the business case for addressing or moving to electric buses in these cities. I want to highlight a few terms I'll use in this presentation. I refer to battery electric buses or BEBs. Alternatively, I'm also using the term e-buses. So we focus here on battery electric rather than other technologies because those are ready and available in the marketplace and the costs are understood. And compare that to diesel buses. Second note here is the costs I'm going to give are for BRT buses. The study also looks at commuter buses, which are a bit cheaper, but here I present the BRT numbers. Now, in this slide, is really the nutshell of the business case for when battery electric buses are going to trump diesel buses merely on the issue of financial cost. Obviously, there are other reasons for doing so, environmental and so on. But the focus here is just to see, well, what are the finances behind it? So what you see in this slide is on the x-axis, the rand per kilometer reflected total cost of ownership of buses. So basically for the full life of the buses, running it for that full period, dividing it by the number of kilometers it is operated, what would be the cost per kilometer? On the y-axis from left to right is the annual operating kilometers per bus. Those are the 2 most important factors that will indicate when is it cost effective to move to battery electric. The solid lines, the blue, red, and green lines, show the battery electric buses at the different design life or useful life, as you can see there. And the dotted yellow lines show the Euro 6 diesel buses at those 3 different useful life points. Now, this slide may look a bit complicated, so let me just break it down for you. If the battery electric bus and the diesel bus that we're comparing is designed for 12 years use, the point at which it becomes financially better to have a battery electric buses from the beginning, in other words, the full period of it for a 12-year bus, is when the bus is used so efficiently that you can get in the region of 54,000 kilometers per bus per year. So those are the 2 things. 12-year useful life is cross-tabulated here against the kilometers that you operate the bus for, and that's the point where it becomes more cost-effective to have a battery electric bus. Secondly, if you have a bus that is purchased for the useful life of 16 years, the amount of kilometers that you would have to do on that bus per year on average is drops down to 50,000. And if it is an 18,000, an 18-year design life, the green arrow shows that where that yellow dot dash line at the bottom crosses the green line, that is where the battery electric bus becomes cheaper, just financially on a cost basis, and that's around 44,000 kilometers per bus. So I'm summarizing really the essence here is your battery electric bus should be compared, when you compare it to a diesel bus. As you can see, just for the rest of this graph, the line on the left-hand side are all very high. It ranges from about 50, just over 50 Rand per kilometer to about 90 Rand per kilometer if you operate that bus only for 20,000 kilometers per year. Now, why is this the pattern? And this further graph explains this. Firstly, on the infrastructure costs that you can see here, plus the bus operating cost, bus purchase costs, and battery costs altogether, the two bars on the left-hand side are looking at a 12-year, where a bus that's bought for 12-year use. In other words, a design for 12 years. Here we see on the left-hand side, the Euro 6 diesel bus will cost you just over 40 Rand per kilometer if you run that bus at 50,000 kilometers per bus per year. You see there at the bottom, 50,000. And the essence really is that the cost of a diesel bus, there's very little infrastructure that is special for a diesel bus other than the fuel tank under the ground and the fuel pumps and so on. I'm not talking about parking and so on. I'm talking specifically to do with the power of the bus. And so you can see there's only a very small slither, only 30 cents per kilometer is attributable to infrastructure costs. On the battery electric, you can see here on the right-hand side, it is slightly more expensive, even if you run 50,000 kilometers per bus per year for a 12-year bus run over 12 years. But the majority of the cost is, while it's still, the blue reflects what I call here the bus costs, which is really the overall cost of running the bus as well as purchasing the bus. Separated out from that, however, is the battery cost, and you have to buy 2 batteries over that period, and that will cost you the pink part of the bar, and the green at the top is the charging infrastructure and the access to electricity. So although it is cheaper to run the bus, the electric bus, because of the other costs, it is slightly more. The total cost of ownership is more. If you, however, buy a bus with better quality, with a good refurbishment halfway through, you effectively will see that the battery electric bus on the right-hand side of that bar, the bar on the right-hand side does better than the diesel bus, still having those components, obviously, the battery and the infrastructure, but because of your better utilization of your capital, the costs become less. Now, diesel buses doesn't have a significant basis of lowering cost in the technology happening. In fact, the opposite is happening. Because of the international move to electric buses, the fewer diesel buses made, and the likelihood is over time, diesel will become more expensive than what we reflect here, and batteries and battery-operated buses will become less expensive. Now, the second factor that brings the cost of a battery electric bus down, as Justin and others have reflected also this morning, is the significant reduction in certain operating costs. Now, the energy per kilometer operated of a battery electric bus is only 13% of what you would pay for a diesel bus. In other words, the electricity you need to buy to operate for 1 kilometer compared to the diesel you have to buy to run for 1 kilometer is only 13%. That is one big reason why the cost is reducing significantly over time, the more you use your bus. And then the second factor here is maintenance cost. Also, as Justin mentioned this morning, for taxis, so the same applies to buses. Maintenance costs about half a battery electric bus. So if you go back to this graph again, the explanation of the fact that the solid lines, the blue, the red, and the green, cross the dotted yellow lines, which are the diesel buses, at some point is because of that lower operating cost that effectively balances out the higher initial capital cost you have, provided you have used the bus well and the bus is designed for a longer life. Now, the discussion on buses obviously must be understood in the context of how many people are actually using buses. This graph shows that only 10% or so of people use buses on a daily basis, taxi being the major one, and cars and trucks second. Now, while this is the case, Justin explained the complexity of operating the taxis this morning. Well, with buses, the fact is it is really well suited because it allows for centralized charging in locations on a specific route. So it's not that it goes everywhere, because secondly, the routes are predictable and the schedules are predictable, which helps with planning and implementation. And thirdly, economies of scale. All those three factors make the bus sector really very well suited to electrification. Now, if we look at the recommendations then on the conclusion here, what we have concluded is there is a business case to go battery electric now. There's good enough information available right now to move to battery electric where those circumstances are met, those factors that I've mentioned before, such as that your design life of buses are longer. The shorter your design life, the more your cost is not offset with better operating. Secondly, you need to use that bus efficiently. Where you have an operating system, an operational plan that uses buses efficiently, the more it is efficiently used, the more your battery electric is going to be your cheaper option in the long run. Secondly, there are recommendations made to operators. What the report says is cities and operators must do their own feasibility study. This study is a very detailed study, but it is a generic one. You must check the parameters that are explained in the study against your own operational plan to assess whether for you it is the more cost-effective solution, if that's what you're looking at, apart from the environmental benefits. Secondly, where possible, you need to improve your systems. Cities and operators, the more efficient and productive you are using your buses, the more likely, firstly, overall, you're going to obviously reduce your cost, but specifically also your battery electric solutions will come up will trump the diesel. Thirdly, the cost of operating e-buses is likely to drop, as I've indicated. So the cost we reflect here is not looking at savings that we may have in future. It's only looking at the current cost. So whatever you do now, if you get a better outcome in this model, it means that it's better for you to go right now. It's the right time to do it. The study also recommends that C40, as the support to the cities, make the costing model available for use, testing, and improvement so that cities and operators can move swiftly to test and come to decisions on whether this is the thing for them. And then there are recommendations to government to take action regarding contracting bus services. The first one here is the current maximum contract term under the National Land Transport Act of 7 years is too short. It doesn't relate to the likely benefits to government in due course because of the low cost of operating a bus if you use it for an extended period and buy it accordingly. And then lastly on the slide, urgent finality is needed on who's responsible for bus contracts. There's been a debate about this for many years. This is not helping contracting and is not helping the operators because they don't know what's going to happen. On funding and finances, a few recommendations. Government needs to finalize its subsidy policy for bus services and public transport services more generally. The new draft policy or subsidy policy that was published, it actually makes it less certain because now there's new things on the table. So it's quite urgent that government use speedily in finalizing decisions. Secondly, government needs to assess industry to access lower cost climate-related financing. To date, there hasn't really been any discount, any reason for an operator to get financing other than the ordinary commercial financing. There isn't green financing that's becoming cheaper, but while there should be, is like as part of the just energy transition, financing should be able to be accessed to reduce the cost further from what I've presented already. There's also an argument to be made for temporary exemption from certain import taxes for wholly built e-buses, but only for pilot studies, because pilot studies help in knowledge about the cost of running the services, but they are very, very expensive because import taxes significantly increase the cost of the capital of the buses if you do it in a pilot. And then lastly, on the 4, is cities need to investigate more cost-effective risk strategies. A factor that we have costed in here is the traditional insurance provision. Insurance is a major cost if one uses only the ordinary market, and alternatives are explored in the report to that option. And then the last item on recommendations is the recently published white paper on electric vehicles, maps out what should be done to support manufacture of electric vehicles, including buses. That should be implemented. What the study shows, we look in detail to anticipate what the number of buses are that will be purchased over time between now and 2050. And you can see the numbers are sufficient to justify good investment in manufacturing of electric buses in South Africa, but that would need implementation of that white paper. And then lastly, the models are needed for development of battery management services. In other words, to get the best out of your battery, because the battery is now such a big component of your cost as an operator, it may make sense for an expert bus-related battery owner and battery operator to charge the batteries, to supply the batteries, to own the batteries, even to possibly deal with the electricity supply and so on, in order to get the best out of the battery and provide that services to bus companies. Some companies may decide to do it themselves, but the question is, will they develop that expertise at that level? And if not, that will cost them more money than otherwise could be possible. Last slide, I'm not going to present. That is just a teaser on the rest of the report. The report gives quite interesting information, new information across a whole range of elements of the bus industry that is available for you to peruse, including things like passenger journeys between the different types of services in the different cities, what the ages of buses are throughout the country, the size of buses in different cities and overall in the country, and lastly, on income and funding of the services that are running. Interesting detailed information for you to explore, and maybe we can explore that another time at another transport forum. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you so much, Dawie. You're getting a big applaud here at Avenue. Dawie, as they say, look at the scoreboard, and you guys set the scoreboard here. And it's such great news you're giving us, the new direction we're going in our industry. I agree what you're saying, expertise. We need to get expertise in our industry to make this happen. Knowledge is powerful, and you guys are helping us quite a lot. So thank you very much for that. Dawie, tell me, will you be able to participate in a panel discussion? But I was.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll join the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Dawie. Appreciate. Looking forward to that. All right, ladies and gents, Jan will give us the program just now. Our next presenter is Mr. Victor Radebe. He's the co-founder of Mobility Center for Africa, and he's going to talk about decarbonization of road freight with micro mobility. Thank you very much, Victor.
Good morning. Sorry. Is my screen visible? Can you help? Is it not?
I want to use this one.
Sorry.
Otherwise, you can quickly copy it over. For online people, we're just copying the presentation over to the production PC. Oh, there it is. There it is. It's working.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I just arrived and didn't have the benefit of the other, seeing the other presentations. Okay, how many of us are petrol heads or diesel heads? Or maybe let me ask, who drives an EV? New energy vehicle? Just one. Okay, the rest of you would love this story. When a man walks into the police station, he says, I lost my wife. She went shopping and hasn't come back. Officer says, what is her height? Average, I guess. What is her build? Not slim, not too big. Color of hair changes according to seasons. What was she wearing? Not sure, maybe a dress. Was she driving? Yes. Color of the car? Or make of the car? Yes. It was a black Audi A8 with supercharged 3-liter V6 engine generating 333 horsepower, teamed with an 8-speed Tiptronic automatic transmission with manual mode. And it has a full LED light, which uses the light emitting diodes of all the lights function, and it has a very thin scratch on the side of the door. Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Like Harry has said, and Harry, thank you so much for having driven this transport forum. How many years now? 17 years. And for some of us, we newcomers, and I see some of the mobility experts are in the room, and whatever I say, and I'm in the higher Institute of Higher Learning, whatever I say, I know I'm going to be asked, what are you contributing to the body of knowledge? So we'll try and see. The topic for me is decarbonizing the shortcut trips. Okay. We always think of the transition from internal combustion engine to EVs. It's something that's going to solve, help save our planet. I'm going to talk on a couple of matters, and I'll try and frame the problem statement, which is the whole big car problem. And then I'll move into saying, go small or go home. And then there's a little call to action to all of you, because some of you here are in the Transport Authority officials who can make things happen at government level. Albert Einstein says, you cannot solve the problem from the same mindset that created it, okay? And for us, that mindset is the car, okay? What is the big car problem? This valued asset, this shiny object that we so love, it lies idle for 95% of the time. Yet it is most households' second biggest investment. When it is finally moving, when it is in use, it moves 1.2 passengers, and up to 90% of the weight it carries, it's carrying itself. So all the parts in the vehicle, it's just carrying itself from one place to the other. You probably weigh, on average, probably about 10% of the weight of the car. Let's look at the trips, okay? Up to 60% of the car trips can be replaced by micromobility, micro vehicles, okay? Between 50 and 60% in China and in EU and North America, all those trips are less than 5 kilometers, okay? When an internal combustion engine vehicle stops, energy consumption doubles for every kilometer travel. And for every 2 kilometers it travels, okay? Since I'm in the education institution, those are my references. Let's look at the EV, because we believe that it's a solution, okay? How many watt hour does it take to move 1 kilometer? For an e-bike, 5 to 15 watt hour. Walking, not so much. Train, not so much. But look at a car. An EV takes up to 400 watt hours to just move 1 kilometer. Comparing NEVs only to ICVs misses the mark. That is what we say, especially on shortcut trips. Okay, I'll expand on that. The new energy vehicles need up to 20 times the energy than micro EVs, micro NEVs, for the same distance traveled. Energy transition presents us with an opportunity to test modal shift to e-micromobility. That is if we truly want this transition to be just. Let's look at, are there any planners in the room? City planners? Oh, city planners, okay. This is for you. You guys are choking our cities with cars. More than half of all urban spaces are dedicated to cars. Okay, you go everywhere. I mean, let's not even count the roads, okay? You go to OR Tambo International Airport, majority of the parking is always empty. You go to shopping mall, if you go to roof parking of any shopping mall right now, you'll be surprised to find a car, unless they've made it free parking, okay? So half of the space is dedicated to cars, okay? If you want to build a shopping mall, the planners will tell you that up to like, what is it, 20% of the floor space must be parking. Whether it's going to be occupied or not, they don't care. Can you imagine if OR Tambo or AXA were to decide that we just ban all parking, or we'll just have all parking? If you want to park we'll just charge you 100 rands an hour. Okay. And think of the mindset shift, because really, if you're traveling to the airport, assuming last mile and first and last mile transportation is efficient, you probably don't need to go and park your car at the airport. Car-centric land use planning is choking our cities. You know, everywhere, development, they have to plan for the car because they know that you're going to be coming with your car. A modal shift from cars to micromobility would free up to 37% of urban spaces, you know. And we've seen some of the roads that have been pedestrianized. I know, for instance, in downtown Johannesburg, Keck Street used to be a road, now it's been pedestrianized. There probably need more of those roads to be pedestrianized. Okay, what's the moral of the story? Electrifying passenger vehicle is still not solving our big car problem. We're still leaving money on the table. Why too much focus on NEVs is counterproductive. We're not saying we shouldn't be focusing on that because we have made our targets with COP27, COP28. We've done that. But why just the focus on NEV is counterproductive? We're saying, again, the issue of the charging infrastructure, chicken and egg conundrum, it's still a problem, okay? And the energy security. If all our cars, 12 million passenger cars in South Africa were to go electric, we'll probably go to stage 16 load shedding. You still have the green premium, okay? Yes, it's going down, but NEVs are still something like 30 to 40% more expensive. And what is said is that the OEMs are not bringing in, it's not in their best interest to bring in affordable, except the Chinese who are bringing the affordable ones, because the highly profitable segment of any OEMs, it's the high-end vehicles. There's also the range anxiety. We probably call this an unjust transition because all the OEMs want to sell us the high end. Why are OEMs only focusing on electrifying the high end? It's because it's the most profitable segment, you know. And Toyota and Nissan, I mean, they're not prioritizing the electrification of the minibus, which are moving up to 70% of our daily commuters. And neither is this the government's plan to do so. Yeah. And it's probably become a private sector initiative. I know Go Metro have been working on it just in Kutia. When the developed world rids itself of all the internal combustion engines by 2030 or 2035, whenever the case might be, there's no price to guess where all those cars will end up. Fortunately, in South Africa, we don't import second-hand vehicles, but in the rest of the continent, that's going to be the dumping ground. Jobs bloodbath for workers in low-skilled fossil fuel industries, again, coal and oil. You know, the events of the past 2 years have brought into question the whole issue of transitioning in terms of whether we should be transitioning at the rate at which we should be, particularly in the continent of Africa. Okay, what is the e-micromobility business case? By the way, e-micromobility, it's all the vehicles that are defined as like 500 kilograms going down. Some of them are the e-bikes, the e-trikes. What do you call the four-wheeler small vehicle? Quike? I don't know. Yeah, so, but what is the business case for e-micromobility? Okay. 1.5 billion cars globally. That is how many cars we have. Probably that was 2 years ago. The prompt number has changed. They are traveling 24 trillion kilometers per year, 90% of which obviously are still internal combustion engine, okay? These trips account for 6 gigatons of CO2 emissions, okay? That is how much they account for. Electrifying all these vehicles will obviously result in 75% reduction in emissions. So we are told. But what's going to happen is that emissions will move from Sandton and Umhlanga Ridge to the poor communities of Mpumalanga, Lephalale, all those Yeah, because we're just moving emissions from here to where electricity is generated. Should we be electrifying or should we be reducing cars? Okay, that is probably what we need to say. Should that second car be really a car? Okay, especially if most of the trips that you're making is up the road to get some milk, which is probably between 2 and 3 kilometers. And by the way, by the time you drive your 3-liter V6 engine, by the time you get to the mall, it's still warming up, you know, even in the cold weather, it's still warming up, you know, and not to mention how much emissions you have. 10 trillion kilometers traveled are less than 5 kilometers. Okay, why can't they be replaced with micromobility? That is the question. When you talk of micromobility, I know the excuse in the past it was, I don't want to get to work sweaty. These days, e-bikes, you will not get you to work sweaty. You know, you'll be fine. What is a value proposition for micromobility is low cost and efficient. It's lowering scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. I'm going to get that in. And then it's the ease of deployment of charging infrastructure. It's easy to deploy charging infrastructure. I'll speak about, got a short video about the swappable battery technology. It contributes to efficient urban mobility with less congestion. Okay. Let's probably consider this modal shift. Here's your last mile vehicle, which by and large is still the status quo. Yes, we are seeing a transitioning to bikes, okay, but still petrol bikes. But it's so much easier for us to decarbonize the last mile with micromobility than it is with the passenger vehicles or the four-wheelers, okay? To try and decarbonize the whole fleet, it becomes even more impossible. One of the biggest rental company heads has basically dropped their plans for electric vehicles, which is becoming a problem because EVs coming into 2024, there's been quite a bit of a slowdown. We are just saying, look, let's get into an environment whereby we can go green without costing us an arm and a leg. What is our call to action? The rising tides, they say it lifts all ships, and the whole is bigger than some of its parts. And we should be taking a leaf out of the East African e-micromobility playbook. You know, if you go to Uganda, you go to Kenya and Tanzania, some of those East African countries, they are actually even going green on their mobility. There is a very strong bike culture there. They've been using them as taxis. And in South Africa, we're still seeing a huge growth in the last mile delivery. And for us, that is an opportunity probably to go green in that space. Should help government develop standards suitable for South African environment. You know, I'm glad people like Joseph Mashela from NRCS and SABS, we've had some engagement with them to say, look, let's look at certification for green standards, particularly in the e-micromobility space. Because right now, if you talk to DTI, if they talk about transitioning the auto industry, they're just talking about passenger cars. We've yet to get the e-micromobility into the agenda of the DTIC. We're going to disrupt the four-wheelers, especially in the less than 5 kilometer car trips space. Take an ecosystem approach to building in this industry. Data and software is a game changer. But going green is not enough. We probably need to even look at going off-grid. I just want to share with you this story, which is a pilot that is taking place in Cape Town. 2 years ago, Joseph, when I showed this, I was showing Gogoro, the Taiwanese company that has pioneered swap and go battery technology. But today I'm glad that I'm showing a South African case of a pilot that is taking place.
Riders are able to book and navigate to their closest battery swapping station. As a rider arrives at the designated station, they are to park the bike safely.
Okay, let's start again. Oops. Let's try again.
Through the VSwap app, riders are able to book and navigate to their closest battery swapping station. As a rider arrives at their designated station, they are to park the bike safely out of the way of traffic. They are to observe their surroundings to ensure that both them and the bike are safely out of the way. The rider will place both depleted batteries to one side. The rider will then scan the QR code, which associates him and initiates the swap process. Step A, an empty slot will open. The rider will insert their first depleted battery and close the door. Step B, the second door opens. The rider will remove the first full battery and insert their second depleted battery and close the door. Step C, the door opens and the rider will remove their second full battery and close the door. The rider returns to his bike, inserts the full batteries, and in less than 60 seconds, he is back on his way.
Yeah, I think what this company has done is just simplified battery swapping technology. And also, if you think of refueling, it's become a problem. I mean, you wouldn't find this within the normal EV space, but this becomes something that if it's done as a standard. But what is key here, which we probably might be missing, is the technology around it. You know, the amount of data that is connected through this last mile delivery. These guys are piloting 100 bikes in Cape Town. They're probably scaling it up to 200. And obviously we Gautengers, we're just waiting for them to fix all the bugs in Cape Town. And then when they come here, we want the finished product that works. So in June, July, it's probably going to come here. Colleagues, in the final analysis, the best time, they say the best time to plant the trees was yesterday. The second best time is now. But hey, let's forget the trees. Let's disrupt all shortcut trips with micromobility. Thank you very much. Can I just put it on? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. Ladies and gents, isn't it great? We're living in exciting times. And looking at this innovation, I'm really looking forward to seeing this in action. Ladies and gents, looking at our program. Thank you, Jan. Ladies and gents, our last but not least presenter is Savashni Pillay. She's a traffic engineer in Northern Region at Sanral. And she's going to talk to us about technology transforming road freight management. Thank you very much, Savashni.
So this is short people problems. Yeah. Can I use this? Okay. I think that makes it a bit better so that I can see my face. Good afternoon, I think it is. So I'm not sure. Everyone, thank you so much, Harry. I think as we normally say, we actually do this quite often for you. So whenever you need Sanral to represent, we are here. Today's topic is a bit interesting and a bit different for me. So normally I present towards the ITS and smart mobility and smart technology projects. I think today we tried to focus a bit differently on just what we're doing in terms of freight management. And I think as Sanral, we're kind of sometimes feel like we have our hands in a lot of pies, but we have a responsibility as a road network operator to look at different solutions and different technologies just to help from an infrastructure point of view, especially the industry. So just really quickly, if I have it. Just a bit of an overview and then some of the current initiatives. I think it's quite interesting. This is the first time we're actually presenting on this. We've been busy with a number of small initiatives in the background. And as you can see, all of it is in proof of concept. All of them are in testing phases. And I think it'll be interesting just to see what we're doing from a freight management solution point of view and what we're looking at as the future. I always say it's interesting for me because at SANRAL, sometimes the best part of trying to present stuff like this is the fact that if I present to industry or even to our role players and stakeholders, the nice part is it's stuff we're already doing, stuff we have already trying to implement and stuff we have implemented. So hopefully you find it useful and interesting. So I think, interestingly enough, Smart Freight Solutions is just about what we focus on in terms of a technology platform. For us, it's purely as a road network operator. Our job is to reduce congestion, improve the road safety, and promote sustainable transport. But in other words, we provide the services and we provide the infrastructure for actual industry. And it's interesting always to note, from a SANRAL perspective, we always say we have between 750,000 to 800,000 kilometers of network in the country. That's both gravel and non-gravel or asphalt. And of that road network, we own only, well, it's a bit higher now. It's over 3.5% of the road network. And currently, as of today, we actually have 24,384 kilometers of road network that SANRAL manages. This carries over 33% of all the traffic in the country, and more than 70% of all the long distance freight actually use national routes. And I think that's why we have such a vested interest in making sure that the freight movement is secure and safe and managed on our network. So these are just examples of what we're currently doing. Just for interest's sake, SANRAL's network can only ever grow to 35,000. Since a year ago, we've been busy with a huge road transfer scheme for all of the provinces. And as of today, we are 24,384 kilometers strong, whereas over a year and a half ago, we were only 22,700. So we have increased our routes quite extensively. Okay, so just the initiatives I want to present. I think there's a lot of stuff happening at SANRAL at the moment. For me, what we actually have on the background to what you see on the screen is a smart mobility strategy that we will soon finalize internally at SANRAL. The smart mobility strategy covers all aspects from freight management to light vehicles, looking at new pavement technologies, new developments, autonomous connected vehicles, vehicle-to-vehicle infrastructure, V2I infrastructure. And this just is purely on 3 items that I've particularly picked for today that are in production and in proof of concept that I think would be interesting for industry just from a freight perspective. So again, I'm saying it's all in proof of concept. We are going to be presenting and implementing it, and the industry is going to be looking at it. But just in terms of what I want to look at today is, firstly, one of the first things we're looking at is a border queue management system. So a little while ago, over a year ago, the presidency set up what they call the National Logistics Crisis Committee. And the National Logistics Crisis Committee, or NLCC as it's known, was looking at a very particular issue at that time, and that was the Lebombo border post, which was experiencing over 40-kilometer queues. The issue with the 40-kilometer queues is that nothing was moving through the border post, and they needed to find a better way to do the management. So 2 initiatives came out of that. The one is the SARS Lebombo initiative that we have, where we provide additional services or technology so they can assist with having more throughput through the toll plaza, through the actual border post. But interesting enough, it is a solution that is a temporary solution put in there to process vehicles and freight at a faster time period that they currently have because of the constraints of the current border or customs officers. The border queue management tool, so what you're going to see today has not been presented yet to the industry. It has been developed. It is a simplistic queue schedule managing tool. And the idea is then that any freight moving through our borders at the moment will go online. They will get a particular time frame and say their guys would be there at a particular time, and we will do the tracking and monitoring of those vehicles of the freight moving through these corridors. So right now, because of the SARS Lebombo issue and the fact that we're doing it with the NLCC, we will look at piloting this queue management tool on the SARS, on the N4 to Lebombo or to Maputo. And then the other one that I want to quickly address today is something called the cross-border law enforcement tool. So I think without saying too much, everyone knows that the e-toll infrastructure as such, whether it's going to, the e-toll itself being switched off at midnight, the infrastructure itself sat with a huge amount of systems and technology that we had used or we have the benefit as the country and the road user. And one of the things we've developed is the actual gantry information that was coming from the for us was very beneficial to law enforcement. So we ended up with a lot of subpoenas and requests for information for movements of vehicles, purely based on the fact that we can give time and place and pictures. So it ended up to such a point where we had created an entire new section, a department, just to manage what the subpoenas were coming in, because the information became very valuable for criminal, for especially what happens with criminal activities on our roads. So what started off as a simplistic law enforcement tool has now become, we've now enhanced and brought in the partners with regards to cross-border road traffic agency or transport agency. What you see here is the user specifications, or what I'm going to show you is the current user specifications that we are going to approve soon, and then obviously develop the product first further. So firstly, just the border management app. And I think from just everybody's perspective, I think this is one of those apps that the industry has been waiting for patiently, and or we've been asked now to have a look at. It's, as I said, a very simplistic software solution, and it's it's there to streamline and manage the booking for processing of clients, but also, so there's two aspects to it. The one aspect is obviously the customs management of the actual border post itself, and they will then do the scheduling and maintenance. So in very simplistic terms, I think we do it now with our vehicle and driver licenses, or our, with our vehicle and driver licenses. You go onto the system, you book a time slot, and from that time slot, you go and you do your vehicle or driver license. In exactly the same way, in the very simplistic way, the border management tool will work. So the aim then is for us to manage the queues at our borders, and not just Lebombo, obviously, but through all our border posts countrywide, and try to facilitate this management, but not getting to a point where everybody's kind of stuck at one section and waiting for their time slot. So the idea then is, as a vehicle owner, you will go online and you will schedule your trip. As the customs official, they will have full access to the admin section of it, and they will then monitor what slots are available for each of their different border posts. So I think, I think the idea really is for us to alleviate all the border congestion we have. We will, as I said here, leverage on all of our equipment, from average speed over distance, the ANPR technology that's sitting on roadsides, including vehicle tracking. And hopefully this then helps us and assists us with the border processing times, but also reducing the congestion at the borders. And interestingly enough, I think from an industry perspective, whether you're from private or public sector, we always look at that concept of trying to get more data. We're a very data-hungry society at the moment, coming with technology. And I think from that data perspective, it can better inform us. I know from a government perspective, we look at better informing us with respect to just infrastructure provision. So the supply and demand then comes, because once we know what the demand is, we can supply. So the proof of concept is already ready, and the first round of the app is going to be presented to the National Logistics Crisis Committee. And from there, we will then approach main players in the industry to look for one or two freight companies that are willing to pilot it for us in terms of that. So the actual app itself is completed and is developed. We will then present it hopefully the next week or two to certain role players to see who's going to test it for us. So like I explained earlier, it's a very simplistic app, and on the back end, it also has a website. The website will be used by the customs officials. And the idea then is for them to manage their slots, for them to manage access, for them to look at the documentation. So there's a whole host of services that sit on the back end for the customer officials that they can manage through it. The mobile application is then available to all owners and drivers, who can then schedule their time slots. And then one of the important parts, and we are busy trying to look at it, is how do you then manage and oversee this? So this is what the app currently looks like, and what the, so on the, okay, so it's your right-hand side is what the administrative portion on the website looks like currently. And this is where all of the customs officials will have a look at how they manage their times and their time slots. It also gives for them, there's a lot more information on the back end. I think once you start collecting information, the customs officials also have it. They will be able to see the booking reports, the fleet reports, driver reports. I think there's a lot of information once we start capturing that can be provided similarly. On the user access side, which is the app side on here on your left side, is what looks like the registration form. And the registration form itself then would be the actual booking process. So one of the important things that I think of booking and scheduling is important, but at something like a license office, you wouldn't end up with the same issue because we will all try to arrive on time or a little before our appointment and we'll stay there. With a vehicle that's driving through the country, it's a bit more harder to manage their times and when they arrive. So they could be either slower or faster, etc. So the either then is then to use technology that we currently have and technology that's in the system, where we will look at monitoring the driver's movement. So the driver's app will then be monitored from the point where he starts his journey. And at any point, we will track it through the system to see where they are, and then to send a message through to the driver saying, you're either too fast or you're too slow, and you need to make sure that you don't arrive ahead of time. And then I think, in all fairness, then there needs to be provision of proper infrastructure also along the routes where they can stop off and they can, I think one of the issues always has been truck stops and where are we providing them and can they stay there and delay their time as well. So this is what it currently looks like. I haven't put a lot of detail in. Obviously, there's far more detail. It's just to present the concept that we're busy with and that we will be presenting to the crisis committee and just involving everybody now. So from an industry perspective, I think what's interesting is it's nice to give the industry a heads up on what's coming. And it's really good as well because we will start a consultation process and everybody then is welcome to say, okay, this doesn't work, this will work, this will not work. But I think if you think about it, it's always interesting. Somebody needs to start. So the start we have given, and we are happy to then to do the development application and just look at what nuances need to be changed. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is obviously the law enforcement tool. So just as just an overview, the current gantry system, be it on or off, still calculates and collects vehicle data. It will continue to remain on after midnight tonight to collect information for law enforcement and road safety purposes. So one of the things that the gantries can do and have always been able to do is we could pick up anomalies in the system. So aside from giving time and place for everything from hijackings to crash and transits, we are also able to pick up anomalies in the sense of duplicate and cloned vehicles. So interestingly enough, it's a system kind of capability where if you see a vehicle with the same number plate or the same type of vehicle in the system within 3 minutes, then there's something wrong because you cannot be in 2 locations or 2 completely different locations within 3 minutes. The only way you can be in a consecutive location is if you are traveling over 180 kilometers on the network. So the system automatically flags it and then it brings it out through the information, and we create a vehicle of special interest list saying that this vehicle is potentially cloned or duplicated, and we provide this information to law enforcement to have a look at. But in the other way around, although we provide the information to them, they are also able to use the information from us, and we can give them the live locations of such vehicles. So this is how initially the law enforcement tool was developed, or for the purposes. I think, like I said, when we developed the app, it was purely to manage all the subpoenas we receive. At some point, we get up to 8 to 9 subpoenas a week for the law enforcement officers that do know, and we provide affidavits and we provide the information. We do special investigations. We have special arrangements with everyone from the Special Investigations Unit, to business intelligence, to SAP's business intelligence. And this has been ongoing for many years now in terms of what we've been doing. Just the difference has been, it has been a very manual process. So I would get an email, or the system would get an email saying, we're desperate, we need information, this is the thing. And they will issue us personally with a Section 205. And then we would prepare the information and try to track it. So the nice thing is this now portal that we've developed means that police officers or investigating officers have direct access to an app, and they have security cleared, or they have to be security cleared to have access to the app, and they can make a direct call or a request via the app. So right now they can also request information like we do with the Section 205, or else they can ask for real-time information. So depending on their level of security or their security access, they can actually ask, we have an arrangement with the anti-hijack unit, for instance, and we get a lot of requests for us to urgently look onto the system for a vehicle moving through, especially when there's a kidnapping or there's some criminal activity that they need to urgently investigate. And through this app, they can directly do a call out to the gantries itself and say, we're looking for this number plate, and they will get a ping or a reply onto the app to say they have located this vehicle, it is on this part of the network and it's moving right now at this location. So this is the big development on the back end, and I think it will be really useful because I think that's what we want to see technology move towards, especially when it comes to law enforcement. But since the development of this app, we've had further engagements with our colleagues at now the Cross-Border Road Transport Agency. So CBRTA came to us and said, okay, a law enforcement app sounds really good for them, but there is a different need from their perspective, especially from a freight movement perspective and across border permits with heavy vehicle requirements. And that's now where we're sitting, where the current app is now going to be enhanced further to add further functionality to assist the CBRTA. So one of the big issues, or some of the applications that we're considering to add onto this now interface, is obviously security. And I think we don't need to go through to security and data protection and all the laws and regulations we have with regards to that. The access would be very restricted to Road Traffic Inspectorate and their investigating officers. But one of the important things is CBRTA's current processes are extremely manual. So at the end of the day, if a road traffic or RTI officer is standing on the side of the road and they need to stop a foreign vehicle, they stop it on the side of the road, but they've got to make numerous phone calls to try to access a database to actually see now, what's the cross-border permit? Is this guy on the right road? Does he have any violations? So the idea on our side then, or our assistance to CBRTA obviously would be to try to digitize this information. So we would take their permit information and we would digitize it. So at the end of the day, when the officer is standing on the side of the road, he sticks in the number plate as he sees it, or he takes a picture of the number plate as he sees it, and it will automatically bring out all the information that he's requesting without any interaction. So it's also, I think, when you come to freight as well, and I think a lot of people understand it, time is also of the essence. So you don't want to delay them for an hour because they're looking for the information and they can't find it. I think this live and real-time interaction with a database on the back end would make a huge difference. Further to that, I think they also have a request for a VOSI list, or a vehicle of special interest list. So we will develop with them all of the vehicles that they have flagged as potential for criminal activities, etc. And we will provide a list on the same app. So one of the nice things about the app, or the way the app is developed, it allows for multiple VOSI lists. So SAPS gives us a VOSI list, Gauteng Province gives us a VOSI list, EMPD, TMPD, anybody that has, or any law enforcement agency that has a vehicle of special interest list is then able to provide us with the list. It all has a backend tab on the app. And at any point, whoever puts in the number plate would automatically get a response saying this is on an EMPD list, or this is on the Gauteng list. Or if SAPS, for instance, stops a cross-border vehicle, they can also pick up the information directly to say, okay, this one is watered by CBRTA. And I think that integration is very badly needed just in general for all of us. Further to that, I think what we are looking at is then incorporating this into static and obviously mobile ANPR technology. So one of the things we've done is I think there's a lot of average speed over distance, for instance, on the N1 from Kranskop to Polokwane. And that, although it's average speed over distance technology, it obviously captures number plates, and that system can be linked backwards so that they can have a look for vehicles moving on the network at the same time. So I think that's interesting now, and especially for CBRT, I think they're quite keen on the fact that this technology means that the CBRTA police, for that instance, would have a lot more benefit coming out of the system. Just in terms of piloting, the idea is then to pilot this one on a different section of route. It's a Beitbridge border post that we want to do it at. So it will start all the way down at Kranskop Toll Plaza and run all the way up to Beitbridge. So what currently happens is that we have implemented average speed over distance from Kranskop to Polokwane. The actual formal administration process is still underway, but the cameras and the technology have been installed already and is available. So what we will do is we will fill the gap between Polokwane to Beitbridge. That designs are currently underway for us to put additional average speed over distance cameras on those sections, which will also double up for automatic number plate recognition software. So hopefully by the end of April, that technology will already be in place and it will talk back to the app itself. So the idea then is to do very specific road interventions with the CBRTA testing now the back end of their database with the ANPR technology, and just see how we can kind of streamline all the processes and then see how it works. So I think the user specifications for the additional stuff that CBRTA wants has already been approved, and they will start the development work, which should hopefully take between just about a month and a half. And in parallel, we're running the additional ANPR technology on the Beitbridge section. So we will have full sight of vehicles moving from Kranskop all the way up to Beitbridge in real time on this technology. Okay, and just really quickly now, the last one. So due to that old NLCC crisis at Lubombo border post, the request was to try to find and facilitate a way for us to have additional capacity so that SARS could assess doing processing a bit faster, because unfortunately development and capital expenditure will take long. So in December, the option came up for us to look at what we call a mobile payment station. So for people that are aware of the toll or the eToll project itself, one of the things we had developed years ago is what we call a mobile payment station. And that mobile payment station has a whole host of technology sitting within these trucks that you see here. So these trucks that you see here have the capability to link back to eNaTIS. It has ANPR technology installed on it, and it has various other capabilities, including Wi-Fi and all sorts of comfortable factors. So it is basically a moving office, but a very technologically advanced moving office. So in December, we provided one of these vehicles for testing at the Lubombo border post for SARS through an agreement with SARS. And I think one of the interesting things is we haven't had a full month's worth of operation yet. We are still working around logistics and resources, and just from personnel point of view, there's also a few issues to be sorted out. But in the process of when we started implementing it, I think the interesting one for us is the processing time, for instance, between October and December was almost 10 seconds in the Lubombo border post. And they've managed now between January and March with additional assistance from the mobile payment station to move this down to about 3.5 seconds. So I think already 3 minutes, 5:57. So I think it's actually so it's average of shaved off about 5 minutes from each truck processing time. I think if you know the border processing process, I think this is a massive difference that they have made. So they average about 1,800 vehicles at the moment, and we've shaved off now with the additional processing about 5 minutes in total. Right now, this particular vehicle only processes the minerals vehicles, the mineral trucks. And with the split at the moment on that 1,800, it's 85% are mineral trucks. So we've managed to at least alleviate quite a lot of the border management issues. I have to say, not to say that I think we're optimistic, But so far, we've not had those big queues even during the Easter period. So I think it is working. So the opportunity then is to say, okay, we have these vehicles that are very mobile. We can provide it at other border posts. How do we do it? And what other options can we do to support other government institutions? Because obviously SARS finds this a huge benefit to them because it makes a big difference. Okay, so just in terms of future initiatives, the last one from a heavy vehicle point of view or a freight management point of view is that we are currently in the process of implementing electronic weigh in motion. So compared to our static weigh in motion stations, EWIM is a much more is a solution that obviously can help us manage the countrywide initiative. We have over 300 planned sections through the entire country. The only problem or the only issue that we need to solve right now is that technically in country, we don't have specifications for IWIM or EWIM, depending on what you call it. So we are busy with the National Regulator of Compulsory Specifications to develop the specifications. At the moment, the specifications are already at the point where they're ready to publish. So they are just finalizing the last bit of issues. Once that is implemented, then we can have EWIM technology at 300 points around the entire country from a SANRAL network point of view, and only on a SANRAL network. It will double up, obviously. EWIM also doubles up like average speed of a distance that provides us with ANPR technology. And then we can further then enhance the CBRTA's purpose, and we can manage now the entire permits process and to see if the truck really stayed on the lane in the routes that they said they were going to. So that's me, and I think it's a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much, Saveshni. Ladies and gents, I think that's what we can call we're moving towards smart borders in South Africa. And looking forward to this. It's such a challenge in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to waste time. We are going to move over to our panel discussion immediately. As far as I know, we've got still two panelists here, Dirk and Saveshni. Unfortunately, Victor had to leave, and bad news is Anna Rebecca Fala from Santaku. She had to leave. Apparently, there's ructions between two taxi associations in Soweto, and this morning 2 people has been killed as well. So our condolences to that family, those families. So Rebecca was called into that situation there. But we invite everybody to the people on Zoom. You're welcome to post your questions in the chat room. We will make sure via email that the questions will reach the panelists, and we will then make sure that you get answered via email. So the chat room we will use for that purpose. But what we're going to do now is we're quickly going to set up the floor here at the front for the 2 panelists to come and take up some chairs here. And we're going to also spotlight Davy Bosch in Cape Town so that you can see and also communicate with him on the screen. So just bear with us for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Ladies and gents, while we're doing the panel discussion, those of you in the venue here, we're going to circulate a box where you need to put in your business card, or you remove the paper from the plastic here and you put that in a box. That's for a lucky draw after the panel discussion, okay? Very important event. All right, you guys comfortable? Jan, you got the camera on there? Okay, how it's going to work is we're going to invite you. Don't know if you guys want to take you've got paper to take notes of questions. So we're going to take, say, 2 or 3 questions from the floor. What will happen is you'll put up your hand kindly. I'll approach you with the camera and a microphone. You'll ask your question. Keep it short, please, because we run out of time. So keep it short. Try one question at a time. You can address either the panel as a whole or one of the panelists. And we also have Darby. Jan, can you do the switch over that we have Darby? So Darby, if you can switch on your camera, please, and we can do a spotlight on you.
My camera is on, but
Thank you.
as you know, I've got my cell phone for the video, so it's separate from the computer.
That's fine.
So I'm there twice.
That's fine. Jan, if you can then spotlight the Darby. Spotlight. All right, so ladies and gents, when you ask a question, identify yourself. You can ask a question to the panel as a whole or one of the panelists. Can I have the first question? There's one, we'll come there and then yeah.
I think just a quick question from a gentleman from Cape Town. I'm Lutando from COJ. I just want to ask, in terms of the 35% feeder services, is that already fitting? And do you have proof that those people have then went on and take a different mode of transport? Or are you saying they are in future can integrate easily to the network? Or is it currently happening?
Thank you very much. Let's take another question. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Verlene Manuel Watson from the South African Network of Women in Transport. My concern is these vehicles, the costing, I would think, would be very high. My question is, why can we not build these vehicles in South Africa addressing the job unemployment situation? Thanks.
Thank you, Verlene. And there's a question. That's right.
Hi, this is a question for Darby, and this is Marco Steenkamp from Zatari. Darby, I'm just curious, the graph that you presented had the total cost of ownership relative to the number of operational kilometers. So my curiosity is around the year in which those battery electric buses really reach that break-even point, because essentially, you know, doing 50,000 Ks per annum doesn't necessarily get you to reaching that TCO break-even point. Maybe in year 7, 8, 9, 10, it might actually happen towards the end of the life of the battery electric bus. And so, you know, having a little bit more context around when essentially you're meeting that break-even point, I would be quite curious to know. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Let's hand over to the panel to respond.
I think I can only really respond to the question on the 35% feeders. I think you referred to 25%, but from memory, I think it was 35%. I may have my percentages wrong, but no, there's no proof from the data analysis that shows that those passengers went on from a feeder service onto a trunk service. I think the intent of showing that was to say that those trips had a terminus point at one of the more popular public transport interchanges, which also serve rail, BRT, and what we have in Cape Town, the Golden Arrow bus services.
Thank you, Dirk. Right, Darby, I don't know if you want to respond to that one question. Darby, just unmute.
Sorry, just the mic here. There are two questions I can respond to. The first one on manufacturing in South Africa. That is, of course, the purpose of the white paper that was published last year. And there are quite a few measures put in place and is now approved government policy. So the challenge, of course, is translating policy into the actual, on the ground, achieving those outcomes. And there has not been a progress report that I've seen from the Department of Trade and Industry or others. So the policy framework is there, and it is stated in aggressive language, or let me say, in language that's aspirational, driving the outcome. So let's see what happens. But so the long and short of it is, it has been well thought through, and if those policies implemented, hopefully in the next year or two, we're going to see outcomes beneficial to electric vehicle manufacture. If we don't see it, we're going to lose in the international marketplace anyway, because the vehicles we make in due course is going to be less sought after. On the second question of when the break-even point is, obviously it's different in the different scenarios. In the 18-meter bus scenario, for the higher your kilometers is obviously are per bus per year, you reach your break-even point earlier. But the break-even point in the one example, which is your 18-year bus design life with, say, 50,000 kilometers, is in a region of about year 12. So there are quite a few years towards the end where you are in the green. In other words, you're saving money. However, obviously, the reality is when you look at the total cost of ownership, provided you have financed it properly and you've got your finances well under control, the fact that you say reach your break-even point in year, say, 14 or 15, if there's still 3 years coming up, doesn't change the fact that overall, provided you've got the budget for it, because your capital cost will be higher up front, you will make that saving overall as a total cost of company. The models that we reflect here obviously includes interest, assuming that you are paying off the loan. So that's an ongoing cost. So higher capital costs will continue to play a role for as long as the loan is payable. But because vehicle finance is usually in buses, the maximum you're likely to get, you possibly would get, is around a repayment within 10 years. That means that you have an upfront of your even repayment for the vehicle. On the other hand, if a city were to purchase buses, it could, and it was unlikely to use vehicle finance for that. It will use general debt finance, loans from the market against the general asset base. And apart from getting better returns, in other words, better payment outcomes, they could pay, that could be the cost, the repayment could be scheduled over a longer period. So the specific question is, it's obviously variable when your break-even point is, depending on the specific detail scenario. And I could, we could have an offline chat, Mark, if that will help. the essence of it is, of course, that wherever the break-even point is, the total cost of company of ownership will be lower if those parameters are met that I've outlined.
Thank you so much, Darby. All right, do we have more questions? There's one, and there, okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Raven Shabe. I'm with the Johannesburg Road Agency. My question is more or less for the entire panelists. One of the things that I noticed is that there is a key thing that is coming out. These are very good studies that they've been conducted, but I'm missing the collaboration between the various studies that have been done. I can start with Justin, for instance. What I wanted to know, unfortunately, I know he's not available. What I wanted to know is that, is this what is conducted? Is this the business case project where it's aimed at establishing a business? Or is this an environmental project that is aimed at reducing carbon emissions? Because for me, it's important that if that's the case, then you marry that with the rail freight as well. I think my colleague from SANRAL will agree with me. With the removal of the e-tolls, maintenance of road infrastructure is going to be key for the future. No doubt about it, especially if you don't reduce your road freight. You're going to have a fundamental problem in raising money to be able to cover those costs. And very importantly, we need very urgently to look at information that we're presenting, especially for us as planners in the local municipalities and governments so that we can start planning the roads for the future. The information regarding, for instance, from Dirk, regarding the vehicles that the financial, Justin, from the financial side of it, as well as from the Cape Town. I would like to know if there was a collaboration between Stellenbosch and the city of Cape Town when they were doing their studies, because it's important for us to start marrying our studies so that we give a complete picture to the planners so that the future planning of whatever infrastructure is well informed and well grounded. Very important for us on the sideline. So also for Santaco, I know they're not here. I would have loved to know from them what is their take on certain key manufacturers that they are supporting in terms of Toyota and so forth, who are not investing enough in the minibus taxi. Because for me is that we should be putting more money on mass transit vehicles rather than passenger vehicles, because that's what I agree with Victor, is that we need to solve the car problem in the cities, not just electrifying them, but we should be reducing cars and putting in electrified mass transit vehicles on the road. And then also, what about rail versus road freight? Who is doing something about moving road freight to rail? Or is our business so entrenched into road freight that moving to rail is going to be seen as losing business? Thank you.
Thank you for that one. Let's take this one and I'll go to Mike.
Thank you, Harry. Panelists, and especially Dirk, is there any initiative to move to digital payments with respect to taxis and buses, like cards, prepaid cards, coupons, mobile payments, and so on?
Is that it, guys? Who are you?
Sorry, and I'm Johan Meyer from ISTEC.
Thank you, Johan. Right, can we make this the last question? Oh, they are. Okay, there will be another round. So Mike, please keep it short.
Thank you. Mike Johnston from Logistics Management. For David, when you are doing 12 to 18-year forecast and plans, you must have to make some fairly critical assumptions in terms of the availability and cost of fuel. because that's obviously going to affect your recommendations and outcome. Can you just tell us how what sort of assumptions you made in that regard, please?
Thank you. The panel can respond.
I'm going to start and respond to the question about the collaboration with industry, and the mention of that. Well, maintenance of infrastructure is going to be key in the future. But in terms of collaboration with industry, I think it was two people that raised that today, and I think the person from Santaco was sitting next to Rebecca. I can't remember his name now. He also asked me about that this morning. So I can only respond from the City of Cape Town's perspective that for this specific survey that collected this data to have made possible, significant stakeholder engagement with the industry had to happen to allow the surveyors to get onto the vehicles and then to stay with these vehicles to record their activity. All the operators had to be made aware of these surveys to take place. It's the only way we could have successfully collected this data. But the intent of the research that I presented today is to develop a framework that can then be shared with the industry and with government to better understand the operations of these services for the mutual benefit of the industry as well as government. So while there hasn't been intentional engagement on that basis, that is the long-term objective. I'm not going to respond to the rail versus road freight question. I think that's probably better answered by my colleague from SANRAL. But the digital payment in the minibus taxi space, there are several initiatives, not necessarily led by government, but there are private startups that have looked at this. The one example I can give you is in Cape Town. It's called Loop, where they use a WhatsApp-based platform where the drivers, they've gotten a few of the taxi associations in Cape Town on board. I actually did a tour with them not long ago where they demonstrated how the technology works, and it's quite useful. There you have a WhatsApp wallet where you load money to, and when you get into the vehicle, you scan a QR code. It shows you who your driver is. He's been vetted, PDP, everything, and the passenger then pays the money. It goes straight into the wallet of that driver, which is linked to a Visa account, and they can then fill up their vehicles from that account as well. So it's a cashless system. There is scope to integrate that with other modes of public transport in the future, but I don't think they're quite there yet.
Thank you. Harry, if you allow me, I need to answer the second question as well. So just from a maintenance point of view, I think, from the JRA, you'd understand what SANRAL is also going through with regards to the freight. The maintenance, our maintenance schedules have moved up. It costs us way more to do the maintenance because of the freight. And it's not only freight, interestingly enough, we also see climate change affecting our maintenance backlogs as well and our maintenance scheduling. So suddenly there's a lot of factors now that means that what would normally be our normal maintenance schedules are moving much faster. And with GFIP or Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project, everyone knows now with the latest developments, and as of midnight tonight, the provincial government will be assisting us to do the backlog, but we have started with the maintenance on the R21 and the sinkhole development as well. But yeah, but maybe the big one to answer is that I'm not sure if you're aware, the DOT is the custodian as the overall body in South Africa. They have developed now what they call a freight to rail strategy. It has, as far as I know the comments from a stakeholder and government perspective closed last week. The idea was for us to look at what their freight to rail strategy is, and they are trying to integrate all the necessary stakeholders. So I'm not sure if it's a document that's been provided to all the government institutes. I know we certainly got one and had to comment on one recently, but I do know there's a huge initiative for them to do a freight to rail management strategy. But I think we'll just have to find out if it's in the public's domain yet. Then secondly, I think that I was unfortunately not here for your presentation, but sometimes being from Sanral, we always comment on things. Previously, at the previous transport forum, I presented on what is called account-based ticketing, an account-based ticketing system. The Sanral Transaction Clearing House that sits at the ETOL facility is a massive backend system that is capable of doing a single integrated ticketing system. What that means is that the Sanral traditional toll account becomes a mobility account. And that mobility account then is able to integrate all public transport operators countrywide. I see the Santaco colleague is not here. We already have a memorandum of understanding with Santaco, which is actually one of the first PTOs that we signed with, or public transport operators we signed with, to look at development of infrastructure within their facilities to integrate into the account-based ticketing system. Just in terms of that, there was draft regulations published 2 years ago by the DOT, or Department of Transport. And the idea then is that all public transport will migrate to the account-based ticketing solution to provide that opportunity to have a single ticket to the entire country. In terms of the testing and what we've done so far, Rustenburg and Polokwane are now our pilot projects that have been successfully completed. As far as we're aware, the regulation sits with the state law advisors for publishing, and eventually or soon it'll be a requirement that we assist now with a single integrating solution for all public transport, not necessarily only taxis, but Santaco is one of the more keener associations. And I think just catching the end of her presentation, I realized that, they are very technology focused as well. And that's probably one of the reasons why we have an agreement already with them to look at the development components.
Thank you, Subhashini. And Dirk, Dawie, I don't know if you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you. To comment on Mike's question on fuel, and I presume linked to fuel is also electricity pricing. The model is a current time model, and the textual deal, or the dealing with the risks of changes, is more in the text of the report. The fact of the matter is we face in the space of in diesel or other fuel, petrol, much more volatility in the pricing than is likely to be the case with electricity. In other words, the numbers I've given you is that the electricity cost of running a bus for 1 kilometer is only 13% of the fuel cost of running a diesel bus of equivalent size. Now, that number is based on the fuel price and the electricity price at the time of the study, which is late last year. But looking forward, when it comes to risk of increased costs, the much bigger risk for operators and cities is the volatility of the fuel pricing. We've seen cities struggling and operators struggling with a very high diesel price because of the Ukraine-Russia war, and other international factors play a role. So long and short of it is, the much bigger risk is on the side of fuel, of using diesel, rather than on electricity. Electricity, even though we've been complaining as South Africans against the significant increase in the price of electricity, the price there has been nothing compared to the increase in the price in fuel. And secondly, it's much more predictable, and it's likely to drop as stability returns in the space and as the lower cost alternative energies come to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawie. Much appreciated. Ladies and gents, I've just noticed time and we've ran seriously out of time. Can you please email me your questions, and I'll commit from my side that I will have your questions reach the panelists and we will respond. Is that fine with you guys?
Can the panelists ask questions as well? I wrote on quite a few questions yesterday. I did not anticipate being
welcome.
on the stage.
You're most welcome, Dirk. You're most welcome. So it's the same, the chat room on Zoom. I know there's a few questions there. So what we will do is we will combine your questions that you're going to email to me with that in the chat room. We've done it before many times. Then we email those to the relevant panelists. They kindly respond, and we actually send the answers of all the questions to everybody who's attended the event. So you will then see all the answers to all the questions and the questions. But can we then please do some closing comments from our three panelists? We can start with Dirk, just short closing comments before we close the session. Thank you, Dirk.
Thank you. So it's unfortunate that Victor isn't here anymore, because a lot of what he said resonates with me. He mentioned that 60% of the trips can be replaced by walking and cycling, and a large part of his presentation was focused on electrified micromobility. But my question to him would have been, why is there such a big focus on the electrifying of the micromobility as opposed to focusing on micromobility in itself? And that, I think, goes to the other modes of transport as well. We tend to focus on electric vehicles recently because it's new and it's sexy. But actually, why don't we just rather focus on optimizing our public transport systems and getting more people out of the cars, out of inefficient vehicle, small, low occupancy vehicles into higher occupancy vehicles? So the paradigm in terms of we should be thinking is the avoid, shift, improve, and not the just improve and shift. So electrifying is one thing, but I think what we should be doing is actually just getting the people into the high occupancy public transport vehicles in the first place. Basics first.
Thank you, Dirk. That's very important. I will definitely have Victor to listen to your question on YouTube. Saveshni, some closing comments.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to close. So I think just from my side, I think when Harry and I spoke about this particular forum, we had we both looked at something very specific, but I see the topics are very wide and varied in terms of the contributions, and especially from a SANRAL perspective. I'm listening to the electric vehicle narrative, especially when it comes to new energy vehicles. I think as far as anybody's read the white paper now as well, it's interesting to see SANRAL is mentioned in the white paper, and that's to support the infrastructure development along the corridors or critical corridors for the new energy vehicles or the NEVs. And in terms of that, we are also busy in process of developing a new policy that will come out for public consultation in about another week or two, in terms of the infrastructure support for new energy vehicles. So although the white paper supports the OEMs in terms of local development because of the high cost of import taxes, obviously on electric vehicles, or SANRAL is also contributing on the other side to make sure that we can do the supporting infrastructure. Just in terms of all of the technology, and I think maybe that's probably it from a smart mobility point of view. There is just so many products and so many opportunities and so many interesting concepts that I think just about anybody from any industry can look at. When we initially started something like the smart mobility strategy, we had developed short, medium, and long-term goals 2 years ago that we were quite keen on. And interestingly enough, just revising or re-looking at them, we've realized that all of these goals, half of them already have been met because of the state or the rate of technology development. And I think that's also interesting is as much as there's enough opportunity, it's also, if we don't catch up, we're going to get left behind as well. So there's a lot going on out there. And I think we need definitely more forums like this where people can understand and get a picture and then come and we all actually, I think the collaboration comes across strongly between both private stakeholders and public stakeholders need to work together.
Thank you so much, Saveshni. Much agreed. Darby, some closing comments.
Yeah, just a final comment. Obviously, Dirk's comment there is to the point, but that's in the space of planning and implementation, but not in fleet. So the fleet must still decide which vehicles they're going to buy. So the technology comes up in the specific spaces. So I'm sure you would agree with that. The one other point I wanted to note earlier, and I forgot when I answered Mike's comment, is there's an operator who presented here, Golden Arrow and Gideon Neertling, who presented at this forum before, Golden Arrow on the issue of fuel and electricity as options have had sufficient confidence to put very many millions of rands of their own money into going electric with respect to their buses. Spending, my estimates are somewhere between 350 and 450 million rand per year in order to procure their 60 buses that they're planning to buy per year in renewing their fleet. Now, if an operator has that confidence, knowing their own business, I think that cities and other operators should wake up and do something about it as well. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you so much for your comments. Ladies and gents, let's give our panel a big hand. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge sharing with us and making the Transport Forum possible. We really appreciate your knowledge. Thank you so much. Ladies and gents, we're going to say goodbye now to the online people. Then we're going to do the lucky draw here in the room. So that's a carrot for those of you who've been online to attend in person next time. But yeah, so Sebastian, are you going to do the lucky draw for us?